maybe we could start by saying, maybe you guys could give me a little thoughts on what is actually the ideal room acoustically, not obviously aesthetically, creatively. There's always going to be compromises. It's nice to have space. It's nice to have windows. It's nice to have, you know, a bunch of instruments, and maybe you're doing it in the house. But what are the things that are, what are the ideal things for acoustics? You could either talk about what's the ideal room or what are the problems with most rooms.
I think maybe fundamentals, Rory. We get a lot of calls. People are looking for, say, like a house to rent with a back house, or there's a room in a house. People send us photos and real estate listings and this sort of thing. And there are certain things you want to consider when you're looking about, you know, for locking in a lease, and you're going to have to work there for a while. And things like you want to be on the ground, you want to be on concrete, you don't want to be on a wooden floor, for instance. You want to be, you want like a 10, 12-foot ceiling if you can, because you don't want your head to be halfway between the floor and the ceiling, because that's where the bass is canceled most, right? So you want a high ceiling, you want to be on concrete, you want to be on the ground, you want to be symmetrical in the room, so you can get the left-right imaging. And this is,
sorry, this is because if you are...
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just say, so the reason for symmetry, can you talk about that, where you don't want to be in the middle between, you don't want to be evenly in the middle between the floor and the ceiling, because, you know, because sound waves are moving air, and if things are equidistant, they're going to cancel in the middle?
Yeah, I think Rory will give the modal explanation.
Yeah.
By being dead center between any boundary is sort of problematic. I mean, we can get into that if you want, Rory.
Yeah, I mean, let's zoom out for a second.
Yeah.
And then we can maybe break down the specifics. But let's say, what is an ideal room? I think the first question we would come back to you with is, what's it for? Mm-hmm. So again, back to this, we're building you a tailored suit. So if it's for collaboration, that's very different than if it's for mastering, you know, if it's for scoring, that might be a different set of trade-offs. Like we have several scoring clients right now versus someone who's producing EDM. So and of course, a good room is a good room. You can write a score in a room where you make EDM and vice versa. But there are definitely getting clear on what it is you want to achieve, because if you've got limited resources, if you're in a bedroom, you probably can't be all things to all men. You know, you can't get everything right all the time. So out of the gate, you're going to have to pick compromises, and making those intelligently is a big part of what we do. It's kind of where we add value. And as a thing we're trying to teach people, that's the most important thing, is if you can limit your sort of use case and know exactly what it is you want to optimize, you can make very clever trade-offs and really make even sort of small bedrooms sound very good, at least in one spot.
Yeah, and make this count.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first question will be, what's it for? And then if we say, okay, it's for, let's say it's for most of your listeners are going to be writing, producing, mixing, probably fairly modern music, right? So let's imagine that's our notional client, and we're saying, what's the ideal room? The ideal room is a room that's comfortable and that gets out of the way, where the record, the art, the song, the collaboration, the energy is the focus. So if we want to get a little more technical, we're saying we want a frequency response that doesn't have a bunch of peaks and dips, because obviously, you know, if you're hearing too much 2K in your room, you're going to make mixes that are shy in 2K when they take them out to the world. So we want an even response. What we don't want, which is a very big misunderstanding generally, is a flat response. Everyone talks about flat, and you can use SonarWorks or Trinov to impose a flat response. You want your low end rising at the bottom. So you want, if you were to look at a proper measurement of a room, a single speaker, you probably want, I would say, a 6 dB rise. Like, say, if we looked at 10K on the top end down to, like, say, 20 hertz, we want a 6 dB rise towards the bottom. And if you tune a room so that it's completely flat, it will sound very lean and wrong to sort of general ears, right? So when we say flat, what we really mean is a rising bottom end, and what's most important is we don't want a lot of peaks and dips. The second thing that is almost completely ignored in the common conversation is what we call the time domain response, and it is very tricky if you haven't thought about this before to sort of communicate it, but it's what happens to sound when it leaves the speakers and enters the room. How long does it hang around for, right? It's not quite reverb, but you can think of it like reverb. So in an ideal room, the time domain response is getting longer. The sound, as you go lower, the sound is hanging around longer, but it's an even, gentle rise. And what you don't want is, when we look at it as a spectrogram, you don't want certain notes ringing for a long time. So we've all had that experience where you're playing a track and all of a sudden one bass note not only is louder, but rings like, or, you're in a vocal booth and when you sing a certain note, it's like, it just rings on like a bell. So that's the time domain response. And really, that's at least as important as the frequency response, and probably more so. Now, that's the perfect studio. That's very hard to do in small rooms on a budget. But, just to restate, the ideal studio is one where you don't think about the speakers and the acoustics, that we can focus on the art, one where the frequency response doesn't have a bunch of peaks and dips, and one where the time domain response is, let's say, controlled, where it's even. And your experience at Keane's would be an example of a room that has that very much under control. And so you get this sensation that busy runs of 808s are clear and focused, and you're not inclined to dive for an EQ when you don't need it, or kick and bass interaction becomes very obvious and clear. And if there is a move to be made, you're like, well, it's 80 hertz and it's a dB and it's a Q of 1. And it's not like a mystery game where you're sweeping around, trying to randomly sort of happen upon something that works. And I think it's fair to say a lot of people haven't experienced that. They haven't had that thing. And when you've had it, it's a kind of a light bulb moment. It's a very different feeling, and a very pleasing feeling, and a very accurate feeling. It's interesting, and I'm glad you said that you're not actually looking for a room that is either totally flat or totally dead. Those are things that are very, very common misconceptions. Mm-hmm. I think part of that comes from people making recordings in completely untreated rooms, and they're like, sounds terrible, which it usually does. We actually had a really interesting discussion that was largely on the Discord, but started with a bit, I don't know if either of you guys were tuning in for that, with John and I, talking about why is mixing on headphones not as good as speakers. And it's to what you said, which is there needs to be an interaction with the room for the human ear to understand the sound in a certain way.
Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, all of this content is free. There's no secret knowledge here. We don't have sponsors. We don't run ads. We don't have a Patreon. All that we ask in return is that you share it with somebody. Thanks.